So let's take a look at how to defeature and simplify a model for analysis. We'll be opening up defeature_simplify.scdoc. Now, defeaturing a part reduces the amount of nodes and elements that are going to be on it. There's a few things that we'll want to get rid of off this model. Now, the one tool that we're going to be using for this is going to be this fill tool. What fill does is it removes regions by extending the rest of them. And again, for more information on our tools, if you press the F1 key while hovering over the tool, you'll get the help menu for that particular tool. Notice filling this round removes it by extending the faces, as it does with the hole. Fill's a great tool for extending the surfaces around the model. So let's zoom in on this raised text, for instance. Notice when I select on rounds, or at the corner of this, if I hit the fill tool, it simply extends these faces into each other. It's a common misnomer that fill always adds geometry and raises it onto a part. Fill will add and remove geometry depending on what's selected, and it does so simply by extending the rest of the faces. So the first thing I'm going to select on is going to be this raised text, because this was not going to be needed for the analysis. It's going to add a lot of nodes and elements and not help with the solution at all. So again, what I'm doing is I'm making a box by holding on the left mouse button, boxing over the text, and once I have it selected, I'll hit the fill tool to remove it. And what this does is it doesn't raise this face stays exactly where it is, and it simply removes the other faces that are there. What I like to do as I'm imagining what SpaceGlaim is doing to fill and remove regions of a model is I imagine that if I select a round chain like this, and I can double click to easily select the whole chain, what fill does is if those faces were deleted and removed from the model, how would the remaining faces extend themselves to get rid of it? And so if I select those and I hit fill, these faces extend upwards, this face extends outwards, and fill creates a hard edge there. So again, fill is going to be great for removing small text and rounds on a part. And now one thing I want to point out, notice I can select on rounds one at a time just by clicking the left mouse button. I can double click to grab a round chain that's there, or I can control select rounds. If you simply select a single round on the part and I hit fill, notice fill just removes that one single round, and it creates these extra faces to stop the adjacent round. So it kind of adds this venting face that's there. I'm going to undo. So an easier way to remove an entire round chain is to double click on the round and hit fill to remove it. Notice that fills that entire chain that's there. Now let's look at how we can remove more of these rounds. So one thing I use in combination with fill to remove geometry is going to be this selection panel on the left side of our screen. This selection panel helps us by improving our selection. In SpaceGlaim, it's important that you have selected what you want to be selected, so it's removed properly. With fill, you should have all the faces you want removed, no more, no less in your selection. So if I want to remove a lot of the rounds in this part, or all the rounds that are the same size or smaller, notice it helps me by automatically finding rounds that are equal to this, or rounds that are equal and smaller. Now when I hit the fill tool, it'll remove them all from the part. So right now what we've done is we've removed the text that was on the top face of the model, and we removed the rounds in the part. Now let's look at a few of the things that we might want to remove. One of them could be holes. By selecting on this hole, notice again we find faces that we want to remove, holes that are equal to this, holes that are equal and smaller. I'm going to select on just the holes that are equal to this, and I want to point something out. always check what you have selected. Notice I have 8 faces selected if I look in the bottom middle of my screen. Did I expect to have 8 faces? If I look here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 holes that look like it's the same size. So if I take a look at my selection, notice this little semicircle here. Let's rotate to the other side so I can see it. This was identified as a hole on my part. The selection filter helps us by trying its best to select on things that it finds are holes, that it thinks are cylinders, things of the same size. You never have to use this as your default selection. You can always hold the control key down, add to your selection, or take away from your selection. So it's really important to only fill in and remove what you want to remove from the model. So now when I hit fill, it removes those holes, and it doesn't affect this part of the model. Now there's 2 more things I want us to look at in removing on this part. One of them is going to be this little section down here. Notice we had more complicated rounds coming into this corner that we may want to deal with at this point. Now if I select on these rounds, Control select to grab all of them, I have 9 faces selected. I'm going to try to hit fill and see what happens. Fill removes all of those faces from the model. I'm going to undo one more time. So again, I double click to grab all those faces, and Control selected these 2, and then hit fill to remove them. I'm going to undo one more time. Now one thing that we can do to help remove more difficult sections of a model is we can go to our Prepare tab. We'll be spending a lot of time in the Prepare tab when we're prepping models for analysis. But one tool that's here is called the Rounds tool, and it helps us remove and simplify things in a model. First of all, the Round tool, notice if you look at my cursor, it only lets us select on faces that it thinks are rounds, which is helpful. The other thing it does is if you select on the edge of a round, notice you see those 2 lines that appear? You can see them good on this blue part. Those 2 pink lines will help us to remove and segment a round that's there. So if I click on this edge, it's using the options on the left middle side of the screen, and what it's doing is it's clipping and removing 60% of this round. So when I click, notice it creates this region and creates this edge. Now it's important that the edges, notice in this case, the line that's created to the left doesn't go all the way from this face on the top to this face on the bottom. If you're clipping around, you want to make sure it goes from the top edge to the bottom edge. So what I need to do is reduce the cap width. Let's say I make that 20. So now you can see I have the edge going from the top to the bottom. And I'll click, and it's going to clip that round that's there. What I'm doing is I'm clipping these rounds. Now we saw that we were able to remove this by increasing our selection and grabbing all those faces. But in more difficult round chains, by clipping and venting these regions, you're making it a lot easier for SpaceClaim to find where these edges exist and remove them from the model. So now I can come back, I'll fill in the bottom section, I'll fill in all the extra edges going into the center section. Remember, I can Control select or double click, fill that in. And now this is going to be a lot easier for SpaceClaim to solve with edges running into this intersection. So venting faces using the Round tool into the Prepare tab is very important to help you remove difficult rounds on a part. So when I click Fill, again, this also removes. This is a good example of needing to remove rounds by venting faces. So I hope you've seen this section on defeaturing and removing things from a model to help simplify it for analysis.